Welcome to Be a Light with Mushan podcast. I'm your host, Mushan Payeski. Over the years, through many platforms, organizations across globe, I have met many inspirational individuals. And recently, I had the privilege and the honor to meet with someone who is very inspiring. And she is Amy from Quill Hawk Publishing. Her background inspired me, and I invited her to the podcast to share her story and also her mother's story and maybe more. So welcome, Amy.
Thank you so much, Musian, for having me. It's a pleasure to be on the show with you. And I'd love to share my mom's story. She's dear to my heart.
Yes, I have heard a lot of stories or even watched movies about Vietnam War or refugee or the people who um, traveled across the sea to United States. But you are the first person actually I got the privilege to know and who has this personal experience. I would love you to share a little bit with our audience and with me about your upbringing and also about this whole journey. I'm sure it was very challenging, and now you become such a confident individual.
Thank you. So feel free to interrupt me anytime because when I start talking about my mom, all the emotions come out and I do tend to cry sometimes. But so April 2025 is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon, and that marks the end of the Vietnam War 50 years ago. So there's a lot going on this year and a lot of commemorating of that experience. But in the Vietnamese community, those who left the country as part of the diaspora, they actually call April Black April, the day that we lost our country to the communist regime. So, I was born July 30, 90 year of the Wood Tiger, and I was actually born 9 months before the fall of Saigon. And I was also a very sick child. I had a heart condition, so there was a hole in my heart. And my mom was very afraid that I would not survive, that I was going to die, which was very likely because the doctor said that I wouldn't last till probably the age of 5.
Oh.
But my mom was in an interesting situation. She was the youngest of 7 children, but they called her number 8 because, usually the parents are the first, number 1, and then the first child is number 2. But anyways, so she was called number 8, and she met my dad, who is another, that's another story, but he actually left Vietnam when Saigon fell. He left with his American wife and their family.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so my mom was abandoned and alone.
Ah,
She had her siblings, of course, but she, when the war ended, she had to go underground to find a way to survive the new government, because they changed the currency. They had a lot of checkpoints. You couldn't freely move about the country. There was a lot that was going on, and so my mom actually found a way to sell Western medicine and other drugs and you know, things that just were illegal to have. So she found those things through the port, through rummaging in abandoned hospitals, what have you. But she went into the black market, sold a lot of things, took a lot of risk, and ultimately, in 1979, my mom was able to have enough money to escape the country. And like many hundreds of thousands of boat refugees, she connected with somebody who was willing to take our money and hide us in a boat and pray that we will make it past the port and into the open seas where there weren't any regulations at the time. But anyways, my mom, with 42 other boat refugees, went out in the middle of the night, got onto a boat on a tiny little shrimp trawler. It was very, very crowded. There was not a lot of food, water, what have you. It was just more than anything, it was just desperation to get out of the country. My cousin was with us, and he at the time was just a young teenager. He didn't know that we were actually leaving the country. Everybody lied to him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone. They told him that he was escorting my mom to a new province to start a new teaching career. But in reality, we went through all these tunnels, navigations, crossing rivers, to finally get to the boat, and off we went. But we were out there for 5 days.
Wow.
Yeah, just bobbing about in the open seas, South China Sea. We didn't have a compass or anything, any way to navigate. Like most boat refugees, we were sitting ducks who navigated by the stars and just prayed, to whoever, God, Buddha, whoever, to make sure that we got there. But um, like many boat refugees who were escaping at the time, we were privy to pirate attacks from Thai fishermen.
Mm-hmm.
They took advantage of us, and there's horror stories, some of which I detail in my book. But there were pirates who came on board, and they raped the women, they kidnapped the girls. There's a well, there has been talks and rumors about an island, that the pirates would put these girls on and would do whatever they want with them, sell them ultimately. But there have been girls who've never been found. There have been people who have drowned because they couldn't swim. I mean, it was just horrible. But we were one of the lucky ones in the sense that we actually came upon an Indonesian island. It was actually Malaysia first. They pulled us out back to sea when they told us we couldn't stay there, and we ultimately went on the other side of the island and burned our boat. And many of those who knew how to swim swam to shore. Those who didn't would hold on to something that they could float on, or that, tried to swim with the others who could. For me, I was only 5 years old,
Mm.
and my cousin found a piece of wood on the boat. And so my mom and him, they threw it in the water, and both of them are good swimmers. Thank goodness. And they put me on this little piece of wood and they pushed me to shore. Um, and that's one of the things that I do remember about that night, was just seeing the boat ablaze, on fire. And when the government officials finally got there, they didn't know what to do with us. They couldn't obviously, pull us back out to sea.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to stay on there for a while before they took us out on this bigger boat. I think it was our Norwegian boat. And there were a lot of bunch of refugees already on there that they had rescued at sea. And
Mm-hmm.
they took us all out to the Galang refugee camp in Indonesia, which is where my family stayed for many, many months, almost a year, before we were finally sponsored to America. And life in the refugee camps was pretty dire. It was surrounded by barbed wire. It was, you know, pretty protected by the military. There were, I think, once a week we were able to go out and swim in the water, and just, for a couple hours, and then they would bring us back. But it was rough. My mom actually did well though, because she was pretty. I think that helped. And one of the military officials on the Indonesian island actually, fell in love with my mom, and he wanted her to stay. But, we were actually sponsored by a church in Seattle, Washington. And so the three of us, we ended up getting on a big 747 airplane, a Boeing airplane. It's called a jumbo jet at the time. It was a double decker, and we got to fly to Seattle. And my cousin, he was telling me that we went from the tropical area to Seattle in March 1980, where it was like cold and rainy, and we were just miserable. But yeah, it was, being in Kent, Washington, and being one of the first few who came to resettle there as refugees and immigrants, there really wasn't a lot of resources. And so, my mom, of course, had to really push hard to learn English, learn how to drive, she went to school to learn how to cook because as the youngest child in her family, she never really learned how to cook. So a lot of challenges in the beginning. My cousin, he uh he ended up running away from home basically because, he couldn't learn English. I mean, by then he was close to 18 years old. And even though we lied about his age so that he can be younger and go to school, he just, it's hard to learn a new language. And he missed home. He didn't want to be there. So he really wanted to get repatriated back to Vietnam. And so for the most part, it's just my mom and me. And so, we arrived in March of 1980. Right after my sixth birthday in July, a week later, I actually had heart failure and I fell down some stairs and I was rushed to Seattle Children's Hospital where I spent several hours in the operating room and had my open heart surgery to fix my congenital heart defect. So, that was a blessing because the surgeon who operated my heart, he actually was triple board certified, very specialized in the valve repair that I needed to get it done. And then he ended up marrying a woman who was the art she was an art major medical illustrator, and she would spend hours in the operating room drawing the procedures, the operation itself. And so when my surgery was done, she would give it to my mom and through a translator, would tell my mom, this is what happened, this is what was wrong with your daughter, this is what we did to fix it. And my mom, she held on to those drawings for many, many years, until she passed away.
Oh, yeah.
And I happened to be on a podcast that had to do with congenital heart defects, and the host uh, found my surgeon, from 40 plus years ago, found my medical illustrator, and I ended up having a reunion with them. But anyways, that's a lot to take right now.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
gonna pause so you can, ask me any
It's
questions you
amazing. I'm afraid to interrupt. It's just such uh, like touching story. At the same time, it's a blessing in disguise. What you had been through. If you were in Vietnam, if you had a heart failure, maybe at the time you couldn't really get the treatment that you needed.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad that you had this opportunity and ended up in the right place at the right time. And
Yeah,
uh,
absolutely, absolutely. And it's been one of my callings now, because of that heart condition I had. I got more involved in the congenital heart defect community, but I didn't get there until after my mom passed away, and I went on this totally different journey because prior to that, I was in tech. And so in Seattle, I was working for Microsoft and T-Mobile. Those were the two largest tech companies that I was working for. And, it wasn't until 2017 when my mom passed away from cancer that
I see.
I just decided I need to figure out what my next step in life was. Because, now I'm lost. It's just like my whole life, just, mom and me. And
Mm,
so, it wasn't even till much later too that my dad and I reconnected, after my mom passed away. So when she passed away, I just decided to quit my job. I told my husband, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm taking 2 years off. So
oh,
I took 2 years off and I ended up, God told me I needed to write my mom's story. And I think it was a cathartic experience because I got to know my mom better through that writing experience. I
yeah.
got to travel to Vietnam. I interviewed war veterans and boat people. So did a lot of unearthing, of my heritage and my story, unpacking all the trauma that not only my mom felt, but I felt also,
Mm-hmm.
as
Yeah.
it's passed on, from generation to generation. And in Vietnam was my first book that really tells my mom's journey of what it was like to live in a communist country after the fall of Saigon, as a single woman,
Mm-hmm.
with a dying child to raise, and what it was like to be out in the open seas and escaping, and being adrift because now she's got no home. Uh,
Yeah. Wow, that
yeah,
definitely took courage and determination for a better life for you. She made that move. And
yeah.
I believe it wasn't that hard for you to adapt to a new language, the new culture in the United States, right? But it must be very hard for your mom.
Yeah, absolutely. I was sick, so I learned English quite fast and tried to adapt quickly. The hard part I think was just, you know, contending with wanting to be Americanized and but still being pulled back into the old cultural ways of being raised and, our customs and that kind of thing. For my mom, at least she knew some English already.
Oh,
And she was interesting because my whole family was Buddhist, but she was the only one that went to university
wow.
in Saigon. And so she left little, our hometown of Trevin, went to Saigon, got a degree in mathematics, and was a teacher and worked at a bank. But she also converted to Catholicism. And so coming to the United States, knowing English and having that Christian faith, I think
Mhm.
helped her to adapt a little bit better. And, we were the first, we were with our sponsors for a while until we got our own housing. And then I think we were on like welfare for a year. And I remember, I used to pray every night, like, help mom find a job so she
Mhm.
could be independent. And, a year later, she got a marketing, was it? Actually, it was a marketing and media coordinator position with the
Wow.
Seattle Times newspaper. So she would, drive from Kent, Washington to Seattle and work underneath the Space Needle, going to job, and she would bring her job home with her. And I used to remember cutting out the newspaper clippings and laying them out. So, trying to figure out what story goes where. And, I was young. I just did it by, what pictures look pretty, but, that was her job for a while, was working for the Seattle Times.
Wow, that's incredibly impressive because I came here, I was also an adult. It took me a while to feel like finding my place. Um, or I also had to go to school to learn the language. Perhaps your mom were quite fortunate to have the ability to speak the language already. Yeah, and also she was very lucky. I think that type of job was very trendy, and even nowadays those jobs are still there. So she definitely was a very talented lady.
She
Yeah.
definitely had some guides, because I was on the board for the Vietnamese Boat People organization, and you hear a lot of stories about, adults coming here and,
Mhm.
they may have been doctors or some, business owners or whatever back in their
Yeah.
country, but here it's like the rules have changed, there's language barriers, and they find themselves, working as a janitor or a driver or something that's, a little bit less than. My mom, I'm just so thankful because she was able to go to boat tech school. She learned like computer drafting,
Mhm.
like all these things. She learned how to cook, which thank goodness.
Wow.
Um, and so she didn't need to go into housekeeping or, bussing tables at a restaurant.
Uh-huh.
She really was very lucky to be more of a coordinator, administrator type,
Yeah,
job. Yeah.
yeah. And I agree. A lot of immigrants came here because of the language barrier. They had to go to school again and to gain the language ability, and then also took those low pay jobs to just get by. And I'm very lucky too because I came here because of my husband. But at the same time, I can totally understand the challenges your mom had to face. and glad she had a good community. And so talk about because you are a writer and also a publisher, which were very inspiring to me when I heard that. So impressive. Would you like to share a little bit what brought you to become a publisher? I know you said that you quitted your regular corporate job to writing, and you want to connect with your mom and through the stories. So, what
So,
brought you to be a publisher?
well, after I published my first book, I enjoyed that process very much, and my readers asked for a book two and a book three, so hence my trilogy. And I started to go to conferences and just really immerse myself into the writing community, and I loved it so much that I learned so much. And I had a friend that I had met on Facebook as through a cooking group, and we had been Facebook friends for 2 years. And one day he just reached out to me and he said, Amy, you're doing great, but you're doing it wrong. And I was like, excuse me? He's like, you are working so hard to hustle your book, your books. But what you should really be hustling is what's in your head, like so much, but you're not sharing it with the world, especially when it comes to publishing. Like how to get a book formatted, how to get the cover designed appropriately for your genre, you know about the ins and outs of publishing. And he said, if I build you a website, will you launch a business? And I was like, build me a website. I don't care. Go for it. So that's how it started. We spent 5 months um, talking about, what I want in my website. And I explained to him, I tried to help him understand the ins and outs of it. And so at the end of those 5 months, he built me this website. It was probably 75% done. And he's like, Amy, it's never going to be done. You're just going to launch and we'll fix it on the fly, as things come along. And so I launched Quill Hawk Publishing and opened up its doors to everybody, I think August 2022. So, we're heading on our third year. And it's been an exciting ride because once I opened up the doors, there were so many writers who didn't want to go the traditional route, but they wanted to have full creative control and be their own self-published author, but they didn't also know how to do it. And that's where the hybrid publishing really thrives, right? Which is what Quill Hawk Publishing is. So we take the best of traditional, we take the best of self-publishing, we dovetail it together and present to the world as a hybrid publishing company where the authors have all their rights, all their royalties. We give them full royalties too, and full creative control. But they publish under our imprint, and they have our expertise, our professional connections to make sure that what they're launching, what they're publishing, is a work that they can truly be proud of, that is standard for publishing industry. Because the last thing you want to do is to present yourself as a self-published author who don't know what they're doing, because people can tell. There's usually a lot of errors in the style guidelines, or they're writing sci-fi, whatever, but their book cover looks like it's a memoir or whatever, so it's one of those things. But we've been doing good. I have over 50, I want to say 54 authors right now under the Quill Hawk imprint, and we've published over 30 something books already. So it's a constant journey. Every book is in different phases, and every author is in different stages as well. But we're we're excited. I mean, every book baby is my book baby. When the authors come and they are like, even if it's like, oh, I'm writing about investing in the stock market, and I'm like, oh really? So it gets me excited about that. Or they're writing about their profound memoir, and it's amazing
Mhm.
these people have been through, and I get excited about reading that too. I just published a book about aliens, so you just
Wow.
never know what you're gonna get.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
that's also one thing I definitely want to learn from you. Recently, actually, my sister published her book on Kindle and just digital format. But definitely, as you said, we don't know what we're doing. And I'm the translator and the editor and want to get the process right so can save the time and the energy. That's something definitely we are going to learn from you. And yeah.
That'd be
So is there like a simple method you can share with our audience? Do you mind to share like the simple steps for
yeah.
publishing a book?
I mean, the biggest thing, the hardest thing, other than writing and hitting, the end at the end, is promoting and marketing your book. And so I always say to writers, start promoting and marketing your book now, not when you have the book published or close to being published, because you want to build your brand, you want to get your followers, you want to line up the people who are going to do alpha, beta readers, that kind of stuff to write your reviews. Because if you're a debut author, nobody's going to know who you are, and that review and those author branding together is going to make a huge impact in your sales, right? But you know, a lot of things that they need to think about if they're going the self-publishing route, they're going to need to think about finances, right? Because you're financing everything on your own. With hybrid, we share some of the costs, but you need an ISBN number, for example. And in the US, Bowker is the only official agency that registers ISBN numbers. Every book has to have one. Every format of a book has to have a unique identifier. If it's well, there's also the Library of Congress. You'll want to apply for an LCCN number. You'll want to hire the right cover designer to make sure that they can do the front, back, and spine, or the interior flaps of your book. And there's things to think about, between font and taglines and the book blurb on the back and the barcode that goes on there. So there's a lot to think about. Um, there's formatting. Is your book going to be a standard 6x9 trim, or are you going to do an 8.5 by 11? So the size of your book matters. Um, Editing, there's different kinds of editing. So, you have your content and development editors, you've got your copy editors, proofreaders, line editors. I mean, there's just so much that goes into that. And if you're going to spend money on anything, if you're self-publishing, it really has to do with your editing. So hire a really good editor and hire a good cover designer. And cover designers, when you think about the economics of publishing, a good cover designer is going to charge you at least $300 for their experience. And usually they'll layer, 3 or 4 images on that cover. A lot of times they can get royalty-free images, so you don't have to pay for them. But if you do, really like a particular image, you might have to pay a license for it. And the licensing can vary. It could be, 300, 500, even 1,000 or more. But those are things to think about, of course. Having a platform to share your work. So whether that be a website or social media. And I think a lot of people don't like social media. So I always tell the authors, pick the social media platform that works for you, that you can deal with. But also think about where your audience or your readers are. So if you're if you're writing a children's book, first of all, you need a really good illustrator too. That costs a lot of money, but you know, a lot of the younger folks who are really into children's books, you're going to find them actually on YouTube. That's where you should be promoting your work. If it's the younger crowd, maybe it's Instagram, older crowd, maybe Facebook. So think about that. And there's free platforms too. So, when someone's just getting started, it can be expensive. Just, there's free resources out there. You got to start somewhere. Newsletters are always great. So if you do blogging, if you have a Substack account, and then I always say when you go to book signings or festivals, fairs, whatever, always find a way to capture people's emails. Those are your lead, not your lead magnets, but that's your funnel for
Mhm.
your community and your tribe. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm trying to think that if I missed anything, but
Yeah, those are very specific and valuable tips, and also the areas that many of us probably cannot understand. However, just the general information is that there's a lot to learn. It's
Mhm.
good to kind of leverage someone who, like you, already experienced this process. As a graphic designer for many years, and also I have been working in marketing for many years, I thought I wouldn't know. But actually, when it comes to publishing a book, when my sister was asking, do you know anything? I said, actually, I don't know. So I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to get connected and get to learn from you.
Oh, thank
So,
you. Yeah, and I mean there's a ton of like YouTube videos and
yeah.
which you can certainly do that and go through them all. What's nice about Quill Hawk is of course we can handhold you through the whole process and you have one person that will, be your guide through the process. Or if you don't want to publish with us, we also have a la carte options. So maybe you just need an editor or maybe you just need a formatter. Or maybe you just need a book coach. We do book coaching, we have ghostwriters, we adapt books into screenplay. Although I need more translators. That might be something we're looking for, but voice actors who can do audiobooks
Uh-huh.
and create
Yeah.
content that way, book trailers. So there's a lot, and if there's something that we don't offer, we definitely try to explore it and see if there's someone we could partner with, to offer that for our authors. So
Yeah. Yeah, we don't know what we don't know. So
exactly.
there's so much to learn. And actually, yeah, we were also thinking about audiobook and paper book. Of course, it's so easy to just publish, like self-publish, like digital book, but there is the limitation of the impact and also the market. Definitely, there's a lot to learn.
Mhm.
So, what's your next steps on your book writing and also publishing? Um,
Yeah, so I mean, right now I'm so focused on my authors and helping them with their journey that it's been hard to take my own time to write my books. I've been working on my memoir forever, and I want to write my dad's story, who just recently moved to Vietnam to
mhm.
retire there. And
Oh,
yeah, so he's got a very interesting story as well,
yeah.
which requires a lot of research because I love historical uh,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
fiction. And so I take my story and I turn them into historical auto fiction, which is autobiographical fiction.
Yeah.
Uh, but yes, so those are the two projects that I want to work on. And other than that, it's just speaking at events,
Yeah.
sharing my knowledge. Tonight I get to speak to fourth and fifth graders in India 2 nights in a row. So I'm excited
Wow.
about that. They're reading Bus Stop Buddies, which is our middle grade fiction that I collaborated with my son on to
Yeah.
write about bullying and friendships and stuff. But yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know. I mean, if there's any producers out there, I'd love to see my book adapted to a screenplay and, be on film.
You know what? Last month I was in a small film. Maybe I can recommend the director to
There
you.
you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
The ripples can create big
I
waves.
know. Yeah, that's why I have this podcast, Be a Light, because once you are willing to share your knowledge, your experience, and your inspirational uh, messages, sometimes you can attract different types of lights into your life. That's what I love about our like platform like this. Yeah, no clear agenda, but by sharing our knowledge and stories, we always connect deeper.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%.
And I would love, if we still have a little time, if you don't mind, would you mind to high level share a little bit about your father's story? I'm just very curious.
Yeah. Okay. So dad, okay, he's got a very, very sad story. When he was 10 years old, he witnessed his mother getting raped by a French soldier. And obviously it traumatized him. His dad was in prison because they fought in the war against the French.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just his mom and him and his younger brother. But my dad ran away from home because he didn't want to be a burden to his mom. He didn't want to be an extra mouth to feed.
Mm-hmm.
So he would run away. He would go to school, sleep on the streets, study underneath the street lamps. He would steal from the vendors for food, you know. Sometimes the teachers would let him sleep in the school. Most of the time, he was sleeping out on the streets. But as he got older, he was just such an educated man. He loved school. He loved to learn. That he competed to win a scholarship, and actually, out of everybody that won, he was the only one that he says he won on merit, whereas everybody else won because of who their parents were. So he got to go to the United States to learn. Um, he met a woman there while he was in school. Lynette actually fell madly in love with my dad, but when it was time for him to go back to Vietnam, she never forgot him. And actually later on, so my dad comes back to Vietnam, he joins the army, and now he's fighting for the South Vietnamese army. And he's done he said he did a lot of really bad, atrocious things in the army. He's had to kill people, he's had to eat human organs to prove his loyalty.
Wow.
Um, he has a lot of nightmares. But one of the things he also did is he was a bodybuilder, so his physique was very toned. He had like the 8-pack abs and everything,
Wow.
and he actually was a driver and a bodyguard for some of the generals in the military. With that came responsibilities with the wives who took advantage of my dad in his position, and so they forced him to sleep with them too, to keep his mouth shut, and anyway, so that's what I want to write about too, is that entire experience. But,
Yeah.
you know, my, so Lynette in the middle of the Vietnam War bought herself a one-way ticket to Vietnam to look for my dad, and she found him. And this woman is amazing. She was a translator, multilingual, worked for the U.S. Embassy, learned Vietnamese fluently to the point where she was translating and writing. She wrote Vietnamese children's books as well.
Wow.
And but when the war ended, she and my dad and their family, she took the kids back to America where it was safe. And it wasn't until much later that my mom and my dad reconnected in the United States. But at that point, my dad was living in Texas, my mom was living in Seattle, and he would come and visit every once in a while. And I knew he was my dad, but we never had any connections. I knew I had half siblings, but we never had a relationship. And but I've interviewed him several times, and he's always broken down in tears,
Mm.
thinking about all the horrible things that he's done. And I keep trying to get him to talk about it, to try to release that toxicity that he's holding on to, that trauma. But now he's in Vietnam, so I have to like fly there to see him hopefully in the next year or two before time runs out, because I think he's 88 years old. Uh,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. That's such a, yeah, probably writing your book about him and also your mom is a great closure uh, for your family and for them.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Glad that you guys got to united.
Right, we did.
Yeah.
Like I said, we've been passing ships, over the years. But when my mom passed away, my dad called me, and he was like, your mom hasn't been responding. She hasn't called me back. What's going on? And I was very angry at that time and very, just depressed. And I yelled at him. I said, well, she hasn't called you because she's dead.
Wow.
Um, and, a week goes by and we didn't talk. And then finally, we connected again and I told him what happened. And then my friend and I, we took a road trip from Seattle to San Antonio, Texas. We drove all the way down to Texas, and I got to see my dad at that point. It was crazy. Yeah, I mean, the first thing he did was he opened the door and he just cried and said, "I'm sorry," and he just held me.
Mm.
And we were together for 30 minutes, and then that was all I could handle. And then I left after all that whole long road trip.
Yeah.
And
When was the first time you got to see him? After,
I mean, I was a child. I was probably like 6 or 7 years old in Seattle when this random man shows up, and my mom said, "That's your dad."
so you didn't know him before?
My memory of my dad, like I was, I was 9 months old
Yeah.
basically when he left the country.
Oh, yeah, that's
So
true.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Well,
I know.
what a intriguing and interesting historical story that your family uh, carries. So, thank you so much for sharing this with me and with my audience.
You're
Yeah,
very
I'm looking forward to more of your books and also one day maybe seeing some of the films, movies about you and your family's lives and transformation. At the same
you.
time, it's like a legend.
That is my hope. Yes, I think, a lot of times the war has always been told from the Western lens. And so,
Yes, yeah,
now that we are starting to heal from our trauma and be able to share our stories, I'm starting to see more and more stories come out there. And I have hope that the boat people, of Vietnam and our refugee stories will be, on big film screens, because a lot of people just don't know about the story of the Vietnamese diaspora.
yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful. Okay, maybe I will, after that, I maybe connect you with the director and see.
Okay.
Awesome.
My date on the red carpet.
Yes, yeah, for sure. That is a reachable dream, and you have come so far. And what can't achieve, right?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
getting it out there. Thank
Okay.
you.
And we are towards our end of the interview. Do you have any other messages you would like to share with our audience?
I would like to say that, whatever journey you're on, to capture it somehow, to tell your story. Don't be afraid, even if it's just for yourself. But there's validity in everybody's experience. And I encourage people to seek the truth and share their stories in one way or another. So thank you for this platform and for having me on the show.
Thank you so much, Amy. I love your authenticity and this a great message that will inspire many of the people in front of us. Again, thank you, and thank you to our audience. If you like this episode, please share and feel free to connect with Amy and check out her website. I will link it under the comments wherever you are on. And also, if you have a book to publish, you can definitely reach out to her to get more insights, more knowledge. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.